nothing that gets you in the heart or in the brain. But if the rationale for all of those provisions had been written into the Constitution perhaps as annotations over on the left side, that we're doing this because of this, I think it might have had a good chance of surviving. That's just one thing. But the most brilliant thing about the Constitution is that it is a negative document. It does not grant powers. At least the Bill of Rights doesn't. The Bill of Rights doesn't grant any powers. It limits the powers. It doesn't say that Congress shall do this, this, and this. It says Congress shall not do this, this, and this. It's those limitation of powers that makes this concept so viable. I think it was Jefferson who got a letter from a friend of his shortly after the Constitution was put together. And the letter said, it was Jefferson. He said, Mr. Jefferson, now that we have our new Constitution, how can we be sure that only good men are elected to office? And Jefferson's response was quite brilliant. He was irate almost. He said, speak to me not of good men. Rather, let us bind men down with the chains of the Constitution. He was saying, in essence, of course we're going to have scoundrels running for office, and of course they're going to be elected. Any system that depends only on good men and angels being elected to office is a dumb system. It's not going to work. Our founding fathers knew that. And so they designed a system which was supposed to prevent the chains of the Constitution, were supposed to chain them down and prevent them from abusing the power that they were given. And it, as I said before, it did a pretty good job, but it didn't do a good enough job. Over the passage of time, those chains were broken, one by a combination of Supreme Court rulings, by people who didn't like those chains, and reinforced by ignorance and apathy of the American public, who didn't understand that there were chains there in the first place. So we have a model, at least. We have to establish certain principles when we set our own program in motion. And they will be negative principles. We must have a creed of freedom, a set of rules, a set of chains that will bind not only our politicians in the future, but those of us who are in Freedom Force as well. And that led me ultimately to the necessity to create something called the Creed of Freedom. Now, the Creed of Freedom is the ideological compass that guides all of our members. It's not like a political platform. It's not a series of issues like we should be opposed to illegal immigration, or we should be for Social Security, or a bunch of issues. No. These are principles. These are principles that are eternal. And if we understand those principles, then we can use them as a template to evaluate all of the issues that come either today, tomorrow, or 100 years from now. They either pass the principles or they're defeated by the principles. So the idea is to focus on principles, not issues, and certainly not on personalities. Now, I can't claim real credit for this. Everything I'm going to read to you, you'll recognize many of these thoughts come from the great thinkers of the past. My role primarily has been to read the literature, to try and figure out what it means, to get it organized, to condense it down, to get it all in one piece of paper. It was really pretty easy. It only took me 42 years to do it. Well, I didn't work on it constantly, but it took a long time. So here it is, the Creed of Freedom. I believe that only individuals have rights, not the collective group. That these rights are intrinsic to each individual, not granted by the state. For if the state has the power to grant them, it also has the power to deny them, and that is incompatible with personal liberty. I believe that a just government derives its power solely from the governed. Therefore, the state must never presume to do anything beyond what individual citizens also have the right to do. Otherwise, the state is a power unto itself and becomes the master instead of the servant of society. I believe that one of the greatest threats to freedom is to allow any group, no matter its numeric superiority, to deny the rights of the minority, and that one of the primary functions of just government is to protect each individual from the greed and passion of the majority. I believe that desirable social and economic objectives are better achieved by voluntary action than by coercion of law. I believe that social tranquility and brotherhood are better achieved by tolerance, persuasion, and the power of good example than by coercion of law. I believe that those in need are better served by charity, which is the giving of one's own money, than by welfare, which is the giving of other people's money through coercion of law. I believe that all citizens should be equal under law, regardless of their national origin, race, religion, gender, education, economic status, lifestyle, or political opinion. Likewise, no class should be given preferential treatment regardless of the merit or popularity of its cause. To favor one class over another is not equality under law. I believe that the proper role of government is negative, not positive, defensive, not aggressive. It is to protect, not to provide. For if the state is granted the power to provide for some, it must also be able to take from others. And once that power is granted, there are those who will seek it for their advantage. It always leads to legalized plunder and loss of freedom. If government is powerful enough to give us everything we want, it is also powerful enough to take from us everything we have. Therefore, the proper function of government is to protect the lives, liberty, and property of its citizens, nothing more. That government is best which governs least. And that is the creed of Freedom Force. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Now, let's open this up to questions. Yes.
Could you tell us what you think the timetable is for world domination and what the picture would be for each individual when that happens?
The question is, what is my opinion about the timetable for world domination and what that would mean for us when it happens? My answer may surprise you. It's already happened. It's not something that's going to happen. It happened. It happened a long time ago. It's just that they're gradually raising the height of the walls. That's all. Gradually, day by day, there are more restrictions and more rules and regulations. And there'll be no time when they suddenly ring the bell and say, okay, the New World Order started today. It started a long time ago. And what it means for our future is that we will live in abject collectivism. Not an awful lot different from the people in Soviet Russia did back in the 60s and 70s. Except we may have a little higher standard of living because of the flywheel effect of our economic system. But even that, I think, will probably run down because under a collectivist system, the incentive to keep production up and services high is gone. And so both production and services would deteriorate, and I think we'd wind up very much like a third world country, which is what they want. They want all of the world to be pretty much the same. Yes, sir.
Where does God figure into all of this? Because in our Constitution, as it was written and set up before, was based on the fact that people governed themselves individually because of the Ten Commandments, because of their belief in God. And now our country is trying to kick God out of everything. So we see all this disaster happening. We see things like the Katrina, the hurricanes, and all of that that's bringing destruction. So in your plan, how does the God factor enter into this?
Well, that's a big question, and I can think of about 7 different ways to approach it, but let me start with the one that's on my mind right now. It's difficult to speak about a divinity without getting into theological dissertations, which I'm particularly incapable of doing very well, and certainly not qualified. So my comments would have to be directed more at the economic and the political side, and leave the theological issue